2 days later, Sharon's phone rang with an unknown number. Trembling, she answered the call, and what she heard made her blood run cold. On the other end of the line, she heard Kelvin's tiny voice. "Mummy, I'm hungry. Mosquitoes are biting me." Sharon's heart broke as she listened to her son's plea. Then, a gruff voice took over, cold and demanding. "We want 35 million naira, or the boy dies. No police, or it's over for him." Sharon broke down into tears, begging the men on the phone not to hurt her son. Peterson, who had been secretly recording the conversation, was already planning his next move. The ransom was non-negotiable, and the kidnappers hung up abruptly. Sharon was too scared to contact the police, fearing they would kill Kelvin if she did. Peter, the twin brother of Peterson, sat alongside their mother at the dining table. The atmosphere was heavy, thick with tension, as they silently exchanged glances. Each of them was caught in their own thoughts, unsure of what to do next. Peterson, the more responsible twin, had long distanced himself from Peter because of his criminal activities. From the very beginning, Peterson had feared being associated with his brother, whose reckless lifestyle had already threatened to cost him his career. It wasn't just the family resemblance that was the problem. Any company that learned of Peter's identity wanted nothing to do with Peterson either. Peter was notorious, a hardened criminal who had managed to escape the full weight of the law thanks to his powerful connections. He had spent time in jail multiple times, but walked out each time as if it were a revolving door, aided by corrupt politicians eager to protect him. Yet, this time was different. Peter had crossed a line, and he knew it. His gut told him that even his political connections wouldn't be enough to get him out of this mess. He sneaked into his room and frantically tried to call Kamsi, an old accomplice. It had been months since they last spoke, but all he heard was the same message over and over. Line unreachable. Something was terribly wrong, and Peter feared that his options were running out. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Bayo was dealing with his own chaos. He had been trying to live peacefully with his pregnant side chick, but life had other plans. They were watching TV together, trying to enjoy a quiet evening, when suddenly, the front door rattled violently. It was Kamsi, nearly breaking the door down with her angry banging. Bayo, shocked and infuriated, rushed to open the door, only to be greeted by a hard slap across his face. "After everything I did for you, you think you can leave me for another woman? In your dreams." Kamsi yelled, her voice dripping with fury. "I promise to make your life a living hell." With that, she stormed out, leaving Bayo stunned and speechless. His side chick sat frozen on the couch, too stunned to react. She had never seen Kamsi like this and didn't know what to do. The tension in the room was suffocating, and the realization began to dawn on Bayo. He was in deep trouble, and this was only the beginning of Kamsi's wrath. His once peaceful life was spiraling out of control, and he had no idea how to stop it. A few weeks passed, and Kamsi's rage only grew stronger. She was not one to let things slide easily. One evening, when Bayo was at work, Kamsi, along with 2 of her friends, sneaked into his house. They came prepared for destruction. Together, they smashed his TV, tore up the couch, and shattered the windows. They hurled insults at him, as if he were standing right in front of them. Kamsi was relentless, wishing Bayo death and cursing his unborn children. She was determined to make him pay for his betrayal. A concerned neighbor who witnessed the chaos called Bayo, urging him to return home immediately. Bayo rushed back as fast as he could, but by the time he arrived, it was too late. Kamsi and her friends were gone, leaving behind a trail of destruction. His once neat home was in shambles. His clothes, suits, and electronics were all ruined. Bayo leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the mess in front of him. He muttered to himself, "What mess have I gotten myself into? Is love really by force?" His pregnant side chick, who had fled when she saw Kamsi and her friends approaching, was nowhere to be found. She wasn't willing to risk her life for a man who clearly couldn't protect her. Bayo stood alone in the wreckage, his life unraveling piece by piece. In a quiet corner of the city, Sharon was trying to rebuild her life after severing ties with Peterson, the brother to the father of her son Kelvin. She had to keep her distance, despite the love she still felt for him. But it wasn't easy, especially as Kelvin frequently asked about his father. "Mummy, where is Daddy?" he asked one evening, his innocent eyes searching hers for an answer. It had been months since Peterson had been warned to stay away from Sharon and Kelvin, and Sharon did her best to follow through on that decision. Each time Kelvin asked, Sharon would quickly distract him with something else, hoping he would forget. But this time, it didn't work. "Go and meet Grandma," Sharon said, gently guiding Kelvin toward her mother. They had to leave town and stay with Grandma for a while. It wasn't safe in the city anymore. Sharon's heart ached as she made the decision, but she knew it was the best option for Kelvin's safety. She would do anything to protect her son, even if it meant breaking his heart by keeping him away from his father. One evening, Peter left a chilling voicemail for Kamsi. "Guy, your work don cast. Like this, everybody don know say we join hand rape the bride. What is the next way? 'Cause like this na jail oo." His voice was tense, and Kamsi knew immediately that things were spiraling out of control. Her heart pounded as she listened to the message, realizing that their time was running out. They were being hunted, and it was only a matter of time before the police caught up with them. Kamsi didn't waste any time. She quickly called Peter using an unknown number. He answered, but it was late at night, and he was high, smoking with his crew. "We need to meet," Kamsi whispered urgently. Peter was startled by her tone but agreed to the meeting. She gave him a location, an old, abandoned Mr. Big's restaurant, and warned him to come alone. "No games, Peter. If you try anything, you'll regret it," she added before hanging up. The following day, at exactly 9 p.m., Peter arrived at the back of the old Mr. Big's, now long abandoned and no longer functioning. It was the perfect meeting spot for people who didn't want to be seen. Peter sat nervously, scanning the area for any sign of Kamsi. When she finally arrived, she was completely covered, looking like an alhaji's wife in a hijab. Peter barely recognized her as she approached. They stared at each other for a long time, the silence heavy between them. Finally, Kamsi leaned in and whispered into his ear, "You have one last deal." She smiled devilishly as Peter recoiled. "I can't. I'm not interested anymore," he said, his voice trembling with fear. Kamsi's smile widened. "You don't have a choice, Peter. If you don't, you'll lose everything you cherish." Peter knew he was trapped. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly powerless. Just as he was about to leave, a group of bigger, badder men stepped out from the shadows surrounding him. Kamsi laughed loudly. "You thought I came alone? Don't play games with me, Peter." He was a hard guy, but even he knew he had no options left. With no other choice, Peter reluctantly agreed to carry out the deal, knowing this would not end well for him. Peter had tried countless times to make a run for it, even after shaking hands on the deal. But Kamsi's watchmen were always 2 steps ahead, their eyes glued to his every move. He was exhausted, worn out from the constant cat-and-mouse game. Yet no matter how tired he was, he felt trapped. There was no way out of this mess. He had no choice but to keep playing along. On the morning of the inter-house sports day in Kelvin's school, Sharon dressed Kelvin up for school. The event was a big deal for the kids. Parents, friends, and relatives would all be there to cheer for their favorite house. Kelvin was part of the Red House, and Sharon had promised him that she and Grandma would come later in the day to support him. Kelvin was excited, chatting with his friends as he boarded the school bus. Little did Sharon know, this day would take a tragic turn. After Kelvin left, Peterson called Sharon to check in on her and Kelvin. At first, Sharon didn't want to pick up, but her mother's knowing glance urged her to answer. Peterson's voice was soft and soothing, washing away some of Sharon's worries. Despite everything, she still loved him, though she would never admit it out loud. After a brief conversation, Peterson asked if he could join them at Kelvin's sports day. Sharon, fearing more drama, refused. Peterson, understanding her hesitation, sent some money instead, asking her to buy ice cream for Kelvin. Then, he hung up. Later that day, Sharon and her mother arrived at Kelvin's school for the inter-house sports event. They were excited to see him participate, but as each house, orange, blue, and finally red, came out for their match past, Sharon couldn't find Kelvin in the crowd. She whispered to her mother, asking if she had seen him, but her mother hadn't either. Sharon grew anxious, trying to remain calm. As the event continued, the running competition began, and Kelvin was supposed to participate. The teachers called his name, number 5, but there was no sign of him. Panic set in. Sharon marched straight to the Red House's head teacher, demanding to know where her son was. The teacher, distracted by the day's festivities, barely paid attention to her. It wasn't until Sharon's anger boiled over that he pointed to her to a section where the children were sitting. "All the Red House kids are here," he said casually. But when Sharon looked, she realized that Kelvin's seat was empty. The panic in her heart surged as she rushed over, counting the children herself. There was no mistake. Kelvin was missing. Sharon's tears began to flow as she leaned on her mother for support. The teachers, realizing the severity of the situation, began searching for Kelvin throughout the school grounds. Some concerned mothers joined in, but despite their efforts, there was no sign of the little boy. The inter-house sports event continued as the teachers tried to avoid creating a scene, but for Sharon, the day was turning into a nightmare. 3 hours passed, and the sports day came to an end. Parents left the school with their children, but Sharon and her mother stayed, still waiting for any news about Kelvin. Despair was written all over Sharon's face as she cried, wondering where her son could have gone. As Sharon sat in her home later that night, utterly distraught, Peterson arrived. He had heard about Kelvin's disappearance and rushed over to comfort Sharon. Despite their rocky relationship, he still cared deeply. Sharon was inconsolable, refusing to eat or sleep. Peterson stayed by her side, even as he felt a growing suspicion gnawing at him. In the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that Peter, his twin brother, might have something to do with the kidnapping. 2 days later, Sharon's phone rang with an unknown number. Trembling, she answered the call, and what she heard made her blood run cold. On the other end of the line, she heard Kelvin's tiny voice. "Mummy, I'm hungry. Mosquitoes are biting me." Sharon's heart broke as she listened to her son's plea. Then, a gruff voice took over, cold and demanding. "We want 35 million naira, or the boy dies. No police, or it's over for him." Sharon broke down into tears, begging the men on the phone not to hurt her son. Peterson, who had been secretly recording the conversation, was already planning his next move. The ransom was non-negotiable, and the kidnappers hung up abruptly. Sharon was too scared to contact the police, fearing they would kill Kelvin if she did. Peterson, on the other hand, was determined to get to the bottom of the situation and find out if his brother had a hand in the crime. After the ransom call, Peterson wasted no time confronting his brother. He called Peter directly, demanding to know if he had anything to do with Kelvin's kidnapping. Peter, surprised by the accusation, denied any involvement. "I can't do such a thing, Peterson. Not after everything I've done." Peterson wasn't entirely convinced, but didn't push the matter further. He knew that his brother had a habit of lying, and he needed proof before making any conclusions. Days passed, and Sharon received another video from the kidnappers. In it, Kelvin appeared weak, dirty, and hungry, still wearing his Red House sportswear. The sight of her son in such a state broke Sharon's heart all over again. She knew she had to gather the ransom money quickly, but she had no idea where to find such a large sum. Desperate, Peter, feeling a rare pang of guilt, offered Peterson a solution. "I can give you 30 million naira. It's all I have." Peterson, though still suspicious of Peter, couldn't turn down the money. He handed it over to Sharon, who tearfully thanked him, though she was still furious at him for his past actions. With the money in hand, Sharon hurriedly followed the kidnapper's instructions, dropping off the bag at the designated location in exchange for her son. The directions led Sharon to a run-down orphanage on the outskirts of town. Her heart pounded in her chest as she arrived, clutching the bag of money. She was terrified, but all she could think about was getting Kelvin back safely. As she entered the orphanage, she spotted her son sitting weakly in the corner, too tired and hungry to even run to her. Tears streamed down her face as she rushed to him, pulling him into a tight hug. "Mummy," Kelvin whispered, his voice barely audible. Sharon wiped her tears away and held him close, promising him that everything would be okay. Without wasting any time, Sharon took Kelvin to a nearby fast food restaurant, buying him snacks to eat as they prepared to drive home. As Kelvin ate, Sharon couldn't help but wonder who was truly behind the kidnapping. Who would do something so cruel to her son? Meanwhile, Peterson received a text message from Peter asking him to meet urgently. Peterson excused himself from Sharon and her mother, claiming he had a work emergency, but in reality, he was headed to confront his brother. As Peterson was meeting with his brother, Kamsi was preparing to leave the country. She had packed her bags in a hurry, sweating profusely as she threw her visa, clothes, and belongings into a suitcase. She had sold her car and a piece of land given to her by her wealthy sugar daddy. Kamsi was determined to never return to Nigeria. She booked an Uber, dressed in a hijab, and headed to the airport, praying she wouldn't miss her flight. But things didn't go as planned. When she arrived at the airport, she was stopped at the security checkpoint. The officers searched her bag and, to her shock, found cocaine hidden inside. Kamsi's heart sank as they arrested her on the spot. She tried to explain that it was a mistake, that the drugs weren't hers, but no one believed her. As she was being escorted away, she spotted Peter and Peterson watching from a distance. Her blood ran cold as Peter whispered to her, "I'm the king of the jungle." It was then that Kamsi realized what had happened. After Sharon had dropped off the ransom money, Peter had taken the bag to Kamsi and they had split the cash. What she didn't know was that Peter had secretly slipped cocaine into her suitcase, knowing she would be searched at the airport. He had set her up to take the fall for everything. Peterson, aware of the entire plan, had notified the police in advance. Kamsi was charged with drug possession, conspiracy to commit rape, and murder. Her world came crashing down around her. As Kamsi sat in the police station, handcuffed and humiliated, Sharon and Bayo were called in to give statements. When Sharon saw Kamsi sitting there, her eyes widened in shock. This was her best friend, the person she had trusted with everything. Now she was sitting in a cell, accused of kidnapping her son and causing so much chaos in her life. Bayo, too, stood there in disbelief. Kamsi had not only destroyed his life, but she had also brought so much pain to everyone around her. As they left the station, out of curiosity, Sharon asked Peterson, "Why is Kamsi wearing a hijab? She's not even a Muslim." Peterson chuckled softly. "Well, your best friend was trying to disguise herself so she could leave the country." Sharon's eyes widened in shock. "Best friend? God forbid. She's so evil and she'll rot in jail," she snapped, her voice filled with disgust as they walked towards the car. Bayo tried to speak to Sharon. "Please forgive me," he pleaded. "I didn't know what came over me. I'll stand by you, I swear." But before Sharon could respond, Peterson stepped in, his muscular frame towering over Bayo. "Back off," he growled, pointing a finger in Bayo's face. "Be warned." Bayo, intimidated by Peterson's size and anger, stepped back, but he didn't give up. Over the next few weeks, He continued to send apology letters, flowers, and gifts to Sharon, all of which were intercepted and destroyed by Peterson. Sharon, exhausted from all the drama, decided to rest and focus on rebuilding her life. In the following weeks, Peterson, and their mother visited Sharon to apologize for everything that had happened. Peter, although still troubled by his own actions, sought forgiveness from Sharon, acknowledging the pain he had caused. Sharon, though hurt, found it in her heart to forgive him, knowing that holding on to bitterness would only make things worse. Sharon forgave Peter on the condition that they would keep the entire situation a secret until Kelvin, her son, was old enough to handle it. Peter was not to come close to Kelvin or reveal that he was his biological father without Sharon's consent. He wouldn't be recognized as Kelvin's father for now, but if Kelvin grows up and decides to acknowledge Peter as his father, that decision would be his. As Sharon slowly started to rebuild her life, Peterson was always by her side, supporting her and Kelvin. Their relationship grew stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, as Sharon was picking Kelvin up from school, Peterson approached her with a serious expression on his face. With students and teachers cheering, Peterson knelt down in front of Sharon, holding out a small box. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. Sharon was stunned as she looked around and saw her mother, Peterson's mother, and even the students and teachers encouraging her to say yes. Tears welled up in her eyes as she glanced down at Kelvin, who looked up at her with his tiny, innocent face. "Mummy, say yes to Daddy," he said sweetly, his voice filled with excitement. Sharon smiled, her heart filled with joy. "Yes," she whispered, and the crowd erupted into applause. As Peterson slipped the ring onto her finger, Sharon knew that despite all the chaos they had been through, they would face the future together as a family. They agreed to keep the details of the past hidden from Kelvin until he was old enough to understand, and Peter was not allowed to come near him without permission. For now, their priority was building a new, happier life, free from the shadows of their troubled past. As she watched Kelvin play in the yard with Peterson, laughter filling the air, Sharon allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just maybe, they had finally found their happy ending. But somewhere, in the shadows, Peter was still fighting his own battles, and Sharon knew that one day the past might come knocking once again. Until then, she would hold on to the peace they had fought so hard to achieve, hoping that the future would be kinder to them all. The story, though full of pain and betrayal, ended with a picture-perfect moment as Sharon, Peterson, and Kelvin walked hand in hand into a beautiful sunset, symbolizing their newfound happiness and closure.